When I really look back over the last 25 years, I can only say that life is life.
Teddy Pendergrass was celebrated for his extraordinary voice and the timeless hits he gave the world. But behind the music, there were personal truths he carefully guarded, secrets that never surfaced during his lifetime. What was he hiding, and why did those closest to him stay silent for so long? The answers are more surprising than most fans ever imagined. I was born to a very, very religious mother who kept me in church. I used to go to church 6 days a week. Teddy Pendergrass entered the world on March 26, 1950, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He was the only child of Jesse and Ida Geraldine Pendergrass, and from the very beginning, his mother Ida believed he was something special. She called him a blessing, a gift sent directly from God. His parents had met and married in South Carolina back in 1936. But not long after, Jesse was drafted into the military during World War II, forcing the couple apart for a significant stretch of time. Even through that separation, their bond held firm. From his earliest years, music was woven into Teddy's world. By the age of 2, he was already singing. And by 3, he had stunned his entire church congregation with a heartfelt rendition of "If I Could Write a Letter to Heaven." It was clear, even then, that something remarkable lived inside this child. Spirituality is just a part of who I am, regardless of the songs I sing, regardless of all the other stuff. Ida made certain her son had every opportunity to flourish. She took him ice skating. She encouraged his curiosity. At McIntyre Elementary School, Teddy proved himself a capable and dedicated student, but his heart always drifted back to music. He joined school choirs at every chance he got. At his mother's workplace, heavy musical equipment sat waiting, and young Teddy would sneak in to play the drums whenever no one was watching. It was in those quiet, stolen moments that a future music legend quietly began to take shape. Eventually, the family moved to an apartment near the famous Uptown Theater in Philadelphia, the beating heart of the city's R&B scene. Night after night, Teddy witnessed electrifying performances from some of the biggest names in black music. But one performance changed everything. Jackie Wilson took that stage, and Teddy watched in awe. It wasn't just the singing. It was the way Jackie commanded the room, the way women in the audience responded with pure, unfiltered emotion. In that moment, something shifted in Teddy. He didn't just want to make music. He wanted to move people the way Jackie Wilson moved them. That experience lit a fire in him that would never go out. As Teddy grew older, his path wasn't always smooth. He attended Thomas Alva Edison High School and joined the Edison Master Singers, continuing to develop his voice. But the neighborhood he grew up in was rough. Gang activity was a daily reality. One afternoon, Teddy witnessed a robbery carried out by 2 young men. He had nothing to do with it. But he was arrested anyway, a case of mistaken identity that landed him in the Youth Studies Center for 4 months. It was one of the hardest experiences of his young life, and it left a mark that stayed with him for years. But Teddy Pendergrass was not someone who let hardship define him. Raised on Christian values and an unshakable work ethic, he kept pushing forward. He picked up drumming gigs at small clubs just to survive, all while keeping his eyes fixed on something greater. When I really look back over the last 25 years, I can only say life is life. Music producer Kenny Huff once described Teddy's voice this way. His voice just roared over you. He had that baritone, but Teddy was raw. I think Teddy really knew how good he was. And yet, for all that natural power, Teddy started out not as a frontman, but as a drummer who sang quietly in the background. A talent scout named G. Lawson saw potential in him and promised to help launch his career. Under Lawson's direction, Teddy recorded a handful of songs, including We Got Love and Should I Go or Should I Stay? But those recordings were never released. Lawson vanished, and Teddy was left with nothing to show for his efforts. At 18, he made his way to Atlantic City, where live music filled the clubs every night. He picked up work as a waiter and eventually auditioned as a drummer for a performer known as Little Royal. He got the job, but a disappointing tour sent him home feeling deflated. Still, he didn't quit. He joined groups including Signs of the Times and the Soul Messengers, each chapter adding to his experience and sharpening his instincts. Then came his big break with the Cadillacs, a performance that put him on the radar and set him on an entirely new trajectory. One night, everything changed. While Teddy was performing, Harold Melvin, the leader of the well-established Blue Notes, was watching from nearby. Melvin didn't see just a drummer. He saw something rare. He made tea. DDY an offer on the spot, and Teddy accepted. And here's something most people don't know about what happened next inside that group. Something that reveals just how close Teddy came to walking away from it all before he ever became a star. Working alongside Harold, Melvin turned out to be the most formative chapter of Teddy's life. He often said that period shaped him more than any other. Melvin taught him the unwritten rules of the entertainment industry, how to survive in a world that chews up talent without a second thought. But success wasn't instant. The Blue Notes were known, but they weren't stars. They performed constantly and still struggled to make ends meet. There were nights when the group couldn't afford hotel rooms, nights when finding a decent meal felt like a victory. Teddy was contributing, but mostly behind the kit. He wanted to sing, really sing, out front, but the opportunity never seemed to come. That frustration quietly built inside him. Then came a turning point that almost didn't happen. During a conversation with a dancer at a club one evening, Teddy confided that he was seriously thinking about leaving the group. Harold Melvin overheard him. Not wanting to lose Teddy, Melvin immediately pulled him aside and offered him something new, a place in the singing lineup. Teddy didn't hesitate. With Teddy now singing alongside the others, the group's energy shifted. Audiences noticed. In 1972, they performed at the Apollo Club in Camden, New Jersey, where two of Philadelphia's most powerful music figures were in attendance, Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff of Philadelphia International Records. The moment Gamble and Huff set their eyes on this group, everything began to change. Harold Melvin, aware of the shifting attention, and perhaps a little unsettled by how much the crowd had fallen for Teddy, formally renamed the group Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, making his authority unmistakably clear. But no name change could contain what was coming. Teddy Pendergrass was no longer just a drummer from Philadelphia. He was on his way to becoming a legend. 5:06 p.m. In August of 1972, Teddy Pendergrass and Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes released their first single under their new label, I Miss You, and it made a solid impression on audiences right away. But it was their follow-up that launched them into a different stratosphere entirely. If You Don't Know Me By Now became an undeniable phenomenon. It topped the US R&B chart and climbed all the way to number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100. Overnight, Teddy Pendergrass was no longer a background voice. He was a star. Fame brought with it everything Teddy had spent years working toward: money, recognition, and the kind of life he had once only allowed himself to dream about. Fellow group member Charles Mint put it plainly: if there wasn't no Teddy, there wouldn't have been no Blue Notes. Mint also credited Teddy's contributions as a driving force behind the success of industry giants Kenny Gamble and Leon Huff themselves. But success has a way of revealing the cracks beneath the surface. Despite being the engine powering the group's rise, Teddy began to feel something uncomfortable settling in, a familiar, suffocating sense that he wasn't being treated fairly. Harold Melvin, the group's founder and leader, had grown increasingly self-serving. He wasn't showing up for the group the way a leader should. He was absent when it mattered and present only when it benefited him personally. Things came to a head during a performance at the Playboy Club in Los Angeles. A disagreement between Harold and club management spiraled into a situation where the rest of the band was left to cover their own expenses, while Harold lived comfortably, spending his evenings with wealthy friends and enjoying every luxury available to him. When the other members asked Teddy to speak with Harold on their behalf, to ask him to help ease the financial strain they were all under, Teddy agreed. He walked to Harold's room, and what he found there stopped him cold. Harold was sitting surrounded by cash, laughing, completely unbothered by the fact that his bandmates were struggling just down the hall. That was the moment Teddy made up his mind. He was done. He refused to be exploited any further, and he walked away from Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes without looking back. The news of his departure sent shockwaves through the group. Their popularity dropped sharply, and several other members soon followed Teddy out the door. Harold Melvin reportedly made threats against Teddy in the aftermath, but none of it shook him. His mind was set on building something of his own. To do that, Teddy needed someone in his corner, someone sharp enough to navigate the business side of an industry that had already tried to take advantage of him twice. He found that person in Taz Lang. Taz was a highly regarded businesswoman and the ex-wife of Philadelphia Eagle. E's fullback Izzy Lang. She moved in elite circles with connections to celebrated names like Dionne Warwick and Nancy Wilson. Teddy was drawn to her intelligence as much as her beauty, and the two became romantically involved. He moved into her home in Mount Airy, a well-known gathering place for Philadelphia's creative and celebrity community. With their relationship on solid ground, Teddy asked Taz for a $155,000 loan to support his production company, Teddy Bear Productions, offering her 1% of the royalties from his debut album in return. She agreed, and she stepped into the role of his business manager, helping him secure his first major solo deal. But then came the fine print. The contract they signed didn't limit Taz's earnings to that first album. It granted her 10% of Teddy's income from all future albums and business ventures, indefinitely. When Teddy read the full terms, the old familiar feeling crept back in. He felt trapped, just as he had under Harold Melvin. He approached Taz and asked her to renegotiate. She refused. The trust between them, once the foundation of both their personal and professional relationship, began to fracture. They continued working together despite the growing tension, but something had shifted. The partnership that was supposed to protect Teddy had become another source of pain. Then, without warning, the story took a devastating turn. On April 14, 1977, Taz Lang was shot outside her home. She had been with Joseph Martinez, known as JoJo, an employee of Teddy's, when an unknown assailant stepped out from behind nearby bushes and opened fire. JoJo had stepped away to retrieve something from the car when it happened. Just before leaving that evening, Taz had called her mother, Ava Ritter, telling her she had something important to share. She never got the chance. The case was never solved. Police investigated, theories circulated, and rumors spread, some suggesting the attack was intended only as a warning that went tragically too far. JoJo survived physically, but he carried the weight of that night for the rest of his life, right up until his death in 2013. The questions surrounding Taz Lang's murder, who ordered it, who carried it out, and why, have never been fully answered. And some believe the truth is far more complicated than anyone has been willing to say out loud. 5:22 p.m. Just 1 week after losing Taz Lang, Teddy Pendergrass refused to let grief become his ending. He stepped onto the stage at Carnegie Hall in New York City for his solo debut, and in doing so, announced to the world that he was no longer just the voice of the Blue Notes. He was something entirely his own. His self-titled debut album arrived shortly after and quickly took off. It went platinum, carried by standout tracks like I Don't Love You Anymore and The Whole Town's Laughing at Me, alongside deeper cuts like You Can't Hide from Yourself. Audiences couldn't get enough. In 1978, he followed that success with Life Is a Song Worth Singing, an album that pushed him even further into the spotlight. The lead single, Close the Door, shot straight to #1 on the R&B charts and became one of the defining songs of his career. The album went double platinum, a testament to how completely Teddy had captured the hearts of music lovers across the country. He didn't slow down. His 1979 album Teddy and his 1980 release TP continued his hot streak, featuring hits like Love TKO and a stunning duet with Stephanie Mills called Feel the Fire. By 1982, Teddy Pendergrass had accomplished something no R&B artist had ever done before: 5 consecutive platinum albums. His concerts sold out wherever he went. He even purchased a sprawling mansion that drew comparisons to Elvis Presley's Graceland. He had built an empire on romance, on intimacy, on making every woman in the audience feel like the only person in the room. That was, of course, by design. Teddy's ladies-only persona was one of the most talked-about elements of his career. His concerts were curated experiences, dimmed lights, slow grooves, and a performer who seemed to be singing directly into the soul of every woman present. Fans adored it. Critics, however, were more divided. Some felt that by anchoring himself so firmly to the image of the romantic leading man, Teddy was leaving the fuller range of his artistry unexplored. His voice was capable of so much, and yet, they argued, he kept returning to the same emotional territory. Others viewed the persona less as artistic expression and more as a carefully managed commercial strategy. It sold albums, it filled arenas, but did it tell the whole story of who Teddy Pendergrass really was? Those questions would soon become secondary, because on March 18, 1982, just days before his 32nd birthday, everything changed in an instant. That night, Teddy was at Club Elon with a friend named Ika, enjoying an evening out. At some point, the two were approached by a woman named Tenica Watson, someone Teddy had a vague recollection of from the 1970s. What he didn't know was that Tenica, born John Watson, had transitioned to a woman in 1977, having long felt she was living in the wrong body. As the evening wound down and Ika had to head home for an early morning, Teddy offered to give her a ride. He invited Tenica along, promising to bring her back to the club afterward. He called me over to his car, Tenica later recalled. It was a Rolls Royce. I thought he was a pimp because I wasn't used to people really having Rolls Royces. He said, "I'm getting ready to leave. Would you like a ride home?" So I said sure. After dropping Ika off, Teddy and Tenica made their way back through the city. They were traveling along Lincoln Drive, a road notorious for its tight, winding curves, when the unthinkable happened. The brakes on Teddy's Rolls-Royce failed completely. The car slammed into a tree. Teddy suffered a broken neck. He was paralyzed from the chest down. Tenica walked away with only minor injuries, a detail that immediately sparked dark speculation about whether she had any connection to what happened. She attempted to reach Teddy in the days that followed, but was turned away. Her reaction, "You're not going to see him before his son does," only deepened the suspicion swirling around her. Then came a revelation that reframed everything. Investigators discovered that the brakes on Teddy's car had been deliberately tampered with. This was no accident. Someone had intended for that crash to happen. Teddy sued Rolls-Royce and won, but the larger question, the one that mattered most, was never fully resolved. Who wanted Teddy Pendergrass dead? His driver's license had been suspended at the time due to unpaid parking tickets. A week before the crash, he had been involved in a separate minor accident while driving his Maserati. And investigators also discovered that other vehicles in his possession had been tampered with around the same period. Teddy himself wondered aloud whether the police could have been involved. He had previously filed a harassment lawsuit against them. "I never really got a chance to tell my side of things," he said years later. "And it was important to me. It's very important to me." At 32, Teddy Pendergrass had been standing at the very peak of his power. And in one night on one road with one set of severed brake lines, it was all taken away. The aftermath was brutal. Depression settled over Teddy like a weight he couldn't lift. The confidence that had carried him through packed arenas and platinum releases seemed to disappear. There were moments, he later admitted, when he thought about ending his life altogether. And as if the silence wasn't heavy enough, the music world moved on. Marvin Gaye released Sexual Healing, and the spotlight shifted almost immediately. But Teddy Pendergrass was not finished. After more than a year of grueling rehabilitation, he signed with Electro Asylum in 1983 and released Love Language, an album that earned gold status and reminded the world what they had been missing. Philadelphia International followed with 2 collections of previously unreleased material. This One's for You in 1982 and Heaven Only Knows in 1983. Then came the moment his fans had been waiting for. In 1985, Teddy took the stage at the Live Aid concert in Philadelphia, his first live performance since the accident. Before an audience of nearly 100,000 people and millions more watching around the world, he joined Diana Ross, Ashford, and Simpson, and others for a performance of Reach Out and Touch Somebody's Hand. He looked out at the crowd and said simply, "I am truly grateful to be here today, and I want you to know I feel your love." The arena erupted. Later that year, he released Working It Back, and things seemed to be finding their rhythm again. But on July 3rd, 1986, another crash, this time in a specially adapted van that struck a telephone pole, left him with internal bleeding and required emergency surgery. Once again, he fought back. In 1988, Joy arrived, and its title track held the #1 spot on the R&B charts for 2 straight weeks. In 1991, he published his autobiography, Truly Blessed. In 1993, a little more magic followed. As the late 1990s arrived, Teddy gradually stepped back from public life. Health challenges had become a constant companion. Then in 2009, he underwent surgery for colon cancer and appeared to be on the road to recovery. But weeks later, his breathing became labored. He was rushed back to the hospital, and after months of fighting with the same quiet determination that had defined his entire life, Teddy Pendergrass passed away on January 13, 2010. He was 59 years old. His family was by his side. He was laid to rest at West Laurel Hill Cemetery in Pennsylvania. A man who had survived exploitation, tragedy, paralysis, and heartbreak, and who had, through all of it, never stopped making music that made people feel something real.